Do you think during times of extreme starvation the districts ever practiced cannibalism? I would be extremely surprised if they didn't, considering that after the first rebellion, people in the capital resorted to cannibalism to beat starvation. And a few years before Katniss's games, there was a tribute in the arena who cannibalized the people he killed. Titus was later killed in an avalanche. It set the precedent that cannibalism was, against the rules in the arena, even if it wasn't specifically against the rules. But why was cannibalism not allowed in the arena? In short, it's another attempt to deunify the entire nation. Allowing somebody to win the Hunger Games who cannibalized his victims would be a grim reminder that not long ago the capital citizens were not that different from the districts. The only reason cannibalism isn't really allowed on screen is because the capital citizens don't like it. There are people all over Panem who are just as starving in their districts as they would be in the arenas. Though we didn't see it happen in District 12, it's also important to remember that Katniss and Gale were illegally hunting for the town, and they would resort to things like wild dog here and there. But if they hadn't gone out and hunted on behalf of other people, and poaching animals even within their own district was illegal, I don't think it's that far of a reach to think that this would have happened.
I just saw A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes for the second time in 2 days, and now I'm going to share my spoiler thoughts, if you do not want spoilers for this movie. Okay, are we all here? I'm going to touch on the things that are different first, because I just need to get those out of the way. They changed the order of the tributes' deaths and how they died, and also how they were portrayed. So I wasn't a big fan of that, but I also know that it was meant to be told with Snow's bias from his perspective. And to be frank, the arena scenes in the books are boring. They do say that in the books, that it just doesn't translate well to a screen. And in a totally practical sense, it wouldn't have translated well to a screen for those very same reasons. So I'm glad that we got to see what it was like in the tunnels, what was happening when the arena was all empty. I'm glad we saw a bit more of Jessup. I particularly liked what they did with Lamina. I liked that we saw a little bit more of probably what she was going through personally, what was written on her face. Even though Reaper's death was different, I'm still glad that it had integrity. And I'm really glad that Wovies was short and quick, because emotionally I was not going to be able to handle that. I wish we had seen more of Coriolanus and Sejanus actually being friends before the betrayal, because I think it would have really driven home just how bad of a betrayal it was. Some of the things that Dr. Gall is there to tell Coriolanus were actually things that were said by Sejanus's mom. And while I wish Sejanus's mom had been the one to say them, because I think it just really drives home how close Coriolanus was with their family. In the Shakespeare play, Coriolanus, Volumnia is Coriolanus's mother, and Sejanus's mom becomes Coriolanus's adopted mom. So I feel like having some of the lines that are supposed to be told by a maternal figure in his life being said by somebody who is his mother in the Shakespeare play makes sense, and drives a bit more of the fucked up dynamic between Snow and Gall. One of the biggest complaints I heard about the movie is that we don't hear enough about Snow's internal monologue, and his downfall and spiral at the end seem a little bit sudden. And I will agree, there's a lot that's unsaid. I think that this is meant, just like the original Hunger Games movies, to be a companion to the books, because we don't hear Katniss's internal monologue in the original movies either, and we have to do a lot of guessing. A lot of the story does get lost in the translation to a movie because you don't hear their thoughts. I like that they tried to convey that through cinematography. I think they did a pretty good job, because every time Snow has a little bit of a mental break, you'll see it zoom in on his face or the face of whoever he's talking to, and everything else around them kind of goes away. And in those moments where he's starting to be more paranoid, you see the almost like a fisheye effect on other people that he's talking to, or the camera will be far behind him but still following him. He has this paranoia following him in the back of his mind that he just can't get away from. And when he snaps in the forest, you see the cinematography change very suddenly from just, every once in a while it'll snap to a weird angle to it's all that weird kind of I'm going insane angle. I don't even know what to call it, but it's just this angle where you can tell that the main character is unhinged based on how it's being filmed. I'm not a film buff or anything, it's just something that I noticed. And I think Tom did an amazing job with his white boy tantrum at the end of the book. The only thing preventing him from reaching his final form is a can of Monster Energy and a baseball cap. I loved his performance. He was really fun to watch in the element. I think he did a really good job of showing what was happening behind his eyes. There were moments where I looked at his eyes and I'm those are
Those are not a person I trust's eyeballs.
I feel like yesterday I was mostly just excited that the movie was finally out, and today I was really able to appreciate the performances that the actors gave, because you could tell that they loved making this movie. Like, you can really see that behind the screen there's a lot of camaraderie there, and it makes it really fun to watch, even if the movie itself is extremely dark. I thought Josh and Rachel were such a great Lucy Gray and Sejanus. I'm really excited to see what else they're going to do after this project is over. And I hope that Rachel Zegler drops a folk album, because her voice is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. I'm really happy that I got to hear the songs how they were supposed to be written instead of just how I imagined them in my head or how the audiobook narrator reads them out loud. I did feel like the pacing was off because it's just such a long book to translate into a movie, but I like that they separated it into 3 so that it didn't seem like as stark of a transition. Something I really would have liked to see at the end is a cameo of Donald Sutherland, maybe a short clip of right before the 74th Hunger Games reaping, maybe his reaction to Katniss volunteering. I don't know. I think that would have been a pretty poetic end, but I understand why they didn't include that. I wholeheartedly loved this movie, not just as a Hunger Games fan, but as someone who really enjoys watching movies. It was the first theatrical movie experience that I've thoroughly enjoyed in a very long time. It's very good with surround sound. So if you're wondering if it's worth it to see in the theater, I personally totally think it is. There's a lot of sound effects that use surround sound that are really cool to see on a big screen. Community with the other people in the movie theater who were equally as excited was so fun. I will share more thoughts as they come because I have so many, but this is a long video, so.
Someone tagged me in a video of somebody saying that Suzanne Collins needs to come out and just start making random announcements about the Hunger Games world building if she's not going to write any new books anytime soon. And I'm not Suzanne Collins, but here are some of those things. They don't tell you this in the books, but Gale is actually wearing a fursuit for the entire series. His fursona is a squirrel. When Katniss was the capital trendsetter, a lot of the things about her that became trendy weren't the fashion that Cinna put her in, it was what she was doing in the arena. So it became a trend for girls to put their hair in a braid and then go outside and roll around in the grass to try and get the same messy, rugged look she had. After the war, Joanna acquires Snow's greenhouse and turns it into a lesbian bar. The entire course of events in the whole series is exactly the same, except the whole time President Snow is scuttling around on a razor scooter. There is actually a clause in the rules to the games where if you get reaped, you just have to say "not it" really fast, and then the last person to say "not it" actually is the one to get reaped. One of my favorite things to do when I read is to figure out which character is the self-insert author character, and I love that Lucy Gray is so clearly Suzanne Collins' self-insert character. I'm thinking specifically about the creation of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes itself. Suzanne Collins has said in interview after interview about when more Hunger Games content is going to come out that she will not write something if she doesn't have anything to say, which is the same thing that Lucy Gray tells Coriolanus when she's trapped in the zoo and needs to perform to get sponsors. Now, there have been speculations about books and movies about Finnick or Haymitch, and Francis Lawrence has said that he would be extremely interested in bringing those to life if they happened. But part of me is wondering if, after the ending of A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, what if Suzanne Collins just drops off of the face of the planet and doesn't write anything ever again to publish? Would it be disappointing? Extremely. But would it be fitting? Also extremely. A frequent conversation in the Hunger Games community is what would have happened if Katniss didn't volunteer for Prim. And a lot of those conversations are about what would happen in the arena and what would be the fallout, how Katniss would be affected by what happened to Prim. But considering going to the Capitol and going through training and then doing the interviews, I think Peeta and Prim still would have presented a united front, holding hands on the chariot, more of him offering brotherly support or something, But here's what I think would have happened during the interviews. I think Prim would have been asked all about her family and her life back at home, and she would have talked a lot about her older sister, who she looks up to. She'd say something like, even if she's not here, I know that she's still protecting me, or something like that. And then Peeta comes on for his interview, and he'll get asked about his family and everything. And then Caesar will bring up Prim and talk about how she's really lucky to have someone like Peeta who will be looking out for her in the arena because her sister isn't there to protect her. And then Peeta would be like, but it's not just Katniss's job to protect her, because Prim is my sister too. The drama. the gasps. I can imagine Katniss's mom's reaction to the television screen. And Katniss goes to the hob, and everyone's, like, looking at her, and she's like, did you guys know about this? Is this, like, real? And everyone's like, I mean, we were kind of waiting for you to find out, dude. Your sister specifically doesn't look like your dad. Disclaimer, this is a joke. I don't think Prim and Peeta are siblings.
Here's what I know about Divergent based on somebody who watched the first movie one time. Some war or something happened that caused the downfall of civilization and for some reason made humanity decide that human beings came in 4 types. So you're raised as that type of person until you reach what? Like 16 or something, like just a certain age. And then you get a test that tells you what of the 4 types you are. And like a mixture of all 4 is Divergent. But also the test telling you what type you are doesn't determine what type you are because you choose. So it doesn't matter? Is that wrong? Like, are you supposed to choose a specific one that goes with what type you are? But then you never see your family ever again if you choose to go to a different group. And the 4 groups are like frolicking in the grass, jumping off of 100-foot tall platforms, and then the 2 other ones that I don't know. So main character is Divergent because she is all 4 types, and one of the first people she meets is named Four, and he's really mysterious, and she doesn't know anything about him. And then, oh my god, he's called Four, because oh my god, he has all 4 types too! And then it's to my understanding that, like, to be Divergent is, like, the norm. And, like, there's way more Divergent people than she thought or something. Or, like, everyone's Divergent. Or something like that. So she, like, wasn't actually special the whole time. That's all I know. That could be completely wrong. Like, that could literally be a complete wrong retelling of the story. I've seen the first movie, and that is my whole understanding of the series. Controversial take. But movie-only fans deserve just as much of a space in conversations about a franchise as book and movie fans or people who have only read the books. Reading books is inaccessible for a lot of people, whether that be because they're disabled, whether it be because the book hasn't been translated to their language. Reading is also incredibly time-consuming for a lot of people, and we live in a day and age where free time is hard to come by. Some people just don't like to read. Some people are film buffs, and they glean a lot more from the movies than they do from the books, and they have a lot to add to the conversation. But regardless of the reason, those reasons are valid. And I know I talk a lot about the Hunger Games on here all of a sudden, but I also talk a lot on here about being disabled and what that's like. There have been long periods of time where reading a book was an insurmountable task, and it was deeply saddening because reading is one of my special interests. Even now, I won't read a book if there isn't an audiobook version of it because I have a really hard time paying attention to just words on a page. Even if somebody hasn't read all of the Hunger Games books, the movies are really, really good. They also add a lot to the canon and provide a lot of new points to analyze and expand on. But we shouldn't discredit people who have only seen the movies in a franchise and still call themselves fans. Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes spoilers ahead. But for anybody who's confused as to why people are just assuming that Coriolanus and Sejanus had a canon romantic history, this line is why. After tidying Sejanus' keepsakes, he returned the box to his locker. What else? He found himself thinking of Lucy Gray, the one and now only love of his life, right after Sejanus died. That's, like, that one line. I read that and, like, I don't know, I just assumed romantic love. Like, that's just what I extrapolated. Again, this isn't me being like, oh my god, they're so cute together. Like, That was just kind of, like, the vibe I got from their dynamic. And, like, I think everyone else kind of got that vibe, too. So, also, like, Coriolanus didn't really like Sejanus as a person. So when he said love, I didn't know what other kind of love it would have been. If the Hunger Games reapings were rigged, how would the Capitol have known who to pick? And this isn't a debate about whether or not the theory is true. This is, if the theory were true, how would they do it? First, I don't think that they picked people that they wanted to punish. In A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, it talks about how the games aren't supposed to be a punishment. They're supposed to represent humanity undressed and show who we really are at our core, which is bullshit. But in order to keep engagement going and remind people of the message of the games, they needed to have someone to root for, someone to root against, an underdog. They needed people that the Capitol cared about. I think they would have done this by choosing specific demographics they wanted from each district and reaping from those pools. I do think they selected certain people to make a spectacle out of a punishment for them, or possibly to punish somebody else and make them watch. And I think they also used a lot of surveillance. Yes, it would have been really hard to comb through tons and tons of surveillance footage, but even now, we have the ability to have surveillance that picks up on specific keywords, facial recognition technology, voice recognition technology. All of that stuff already exists, so I can only imagine how much more advanced it would have been by the time the Hunger Games happened. At least in District 12, they also had government-mandated TVs in every single house, and if they had surveillance devices that were as small as a piece of glitter, I'm sure that they probably would have been able to have some level of surveillance in all of the households and pick up on said keywords. Also having inside contacts with peacekeepers who could keep an eye on who the well-liked people of the districts were or what was going on, who had beef with who, and maybe a mixture of all of those things, I don't know. Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie and book spoilers ahead. Were Coriolanus and Lucy Gray ever really in love? I think that they were in love in the same way Romeo and Juliet were in love, in that pretty much everybody else doesn't necessarily see it as love, but they definitely do. I think it's also beyond safe to say that Lucy Gray has a trauma bond with Coriolanus. Immediately before forming this trauma bond with Coriolanus, she had been cheated on by her ex, and was still coming off of that relationship. And every single aspect of Coriolanus' life was completely out of his control, except for one thing, which was a girl that was in a cage, that he also thought was really pretty. Coriolanus loved Lucy Gray as long as he knew how to keep her under control. And Lucy Gray loved Coriolanus as long as she knew she could trust him. That final excursion into the woods was kind of like their test to each other, I feel like. Lucy Gray was testing to see if Coriolanus loved her enough to follow her into the woods, into the unknown, and leave everything behind. And Coriolanus didn't even want to risk testing to see if Lucy Gray would rat him out to the capital, even though I feel like she may have understood if he got cold feet and wanted to go back. But unfortunately, long before the end of the book, I think Snow had lost the capacity to love anybody except for himself. Hey, I hope we can acknowledge the very real problems that come with shipping Coriolanus Snow with Lucy Gray. And I'm not just saying this to be a killjoy, I'm saying this as somebody who has been in the fandom space for a very long time, and I see the kinds of things that get romanticized. Snow is an oppressor. He's an abuser. He wanted to keep Lucy Gray in chains just so that he would have more of an eye on her. They are not a dynamic to be glorifying or finding cute things in. Like, it is profoundly fucked up. And like, do not get me wrong. I was thirsting the entire time I watched that movie. Lionsgate chooses beautiful cast members every single time they put out a movie. We can absolutely thirst over Tom and Rachel without glorifying a dynamic between an oppressor with a gun and somebody who has been systematically oppressed by said person with gun. And don't get me wrong, I think coming up with alternate universes is so fun. I think having fun with characters in fan fiction and changing their characteristics, character assassination with your own creative liberties is so fun. So if we're gonna do Snowbeard alternate universes and things, we should first acknowledge that we shouldn't be shipping the characters as they are, or glorifying their dynamic in any way, or be painting Coriolanus Snow as a sad, misunderstood villain, because he's not. It sounds silly, but these kinds of mindsets and dynamics can really bleed easily into real life, so it's important to identify them when we see them in fiction. I don't ship Coriolanus. I just believe that Coriolanus is or was at some point canon. I don't know how else to read their dynamic in the book. They're like flirting. There are way too many deep-seated, complicated, angsty feelings between them. Like, way too many. And Sejanus is literally like this the whole time. He's literally like giggling and kicking his feet when he sees that Snow was in District 12. I know it says they hugged when they saw each other, but like, we have not even touched on the moment in the arena that I'm probably just going to be thinking about for a while. That lip is working for you, soldier. Like, I don't know what else to say. Was it a reciprocated
relationship? At one point, I firmly believe yes. And I think, first of all, that would add so much to the choreo at the end, or the guilt and grief that Snow feels afterwards, or the fact that Snow is continually in denial of the fact that they're super, super close, but everybody is commenting on the fact that they are, like, literally so close. Like, everybody just pins them as attached at the hip because they do everything together. And the reasons for this dynamic could be like a multitude of things, but I think at one point it's extremely safe to say that Coriolanus wasn't necessarily evil. He was just morally trying to figure out what was going on. He was being very influenced by the adults in his life because he was still a child. So before everything kind of fell apart, I would not be at all surprised if there was an authentic relationship between the two at some point. It simply makes sense to me. What do we think the general effect towards LGBTQ plus identities was in the capital and the district? This is an excellent question. Katniss does say in the books that the freedom to marry who you choose is one of the very few freedoms that people have in Panem. I also believe that in A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, there is a girl in the covey who has a girlfriend. We also know that Pluribus Bell has a partner named Cyrus. I didn't see any mentions of any trans people in the districts or the capital, but I did really like that they had a trans actress play Tigress in the movie. Even if she isn't trans in the books, or if the climate for trans people wasn't friendly, I'm really glad we had that representation. As far as what the climate was, though, for LGBT people, even if it was legal to marry whoever you wanted, I am certain that there were people who used humanity being on the brink of extinction as a way to defend their hatred. The capital really pushed for division in the districts, and I'm sure that's something that they would have used in order to encourage it. And we know for a fact that the capital definitely exploited the LGBT community. The victors who were sold to people, it didn't matter who the person was, they would be sold to them. And if we take into account that the capital can target people with their reapings if they're rigged in any way, they could easily target somebody of a specific sexuality for a diversity win on the show, or to make some kind of statement, or to try and get them to win and exploit them afterwards. Even if the political climate in Panem allows for queer people to exist and be married, anything they can use to divide people and create a sense of moral superiority, they're going to do. And no matter how much change happens socially, there are always going to be hateful, homophobic people, so I don't think Panem would be any different.
Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes spoilers, but I haven't even considered the possibility that the Covey didn't know that Coriolanus didn't escape with Lucy Gray until they saw him become president, especially because of how limited TV access was in District 12. It's very possible that they would not have seen very much about his rise to power until he was actually in it. Considering how involved a lot of the Covey members were with the rebellion, I can only imagine what the reaction would have been to them finding out for the first time. If and how that contributed to the overall rebel plan. Maybe they thought he and Lucy had successfully escaped together and they assumed that something went awry and he unalived her. There's also the possibility that at some point down the line, Lucy Gray ended up finding her way back to District 12, which I very highly doubt, but is a possibility. And if that were the case, Lucy keeps her cards close to her heart, and I feel like she probably would have kept a lot of the secrets about her and Snow a secret for her own survival, only for everyone to find out the truth eventually when he showed up on TV as president. This is something I feel like people are underprepared for every time a new Hunger Games movie comes out, even though Lionsgate has never really made gory movies. Like, I think in every single Hunger Games movie, I've heard complaints about how they don't really show how intense it is enough. But yeah, for one, they have to keep it PG-13. But also, I think it's very calculated on their part because there are some parts of the message that could get lost if they were portrayed on the screen the way they were described in the books. I think there's a danger of it crossing the line from showing a message and showing, like, shock horror. Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes spoiler, so if you don't want it, scroll away. But two examples I can think of from A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes are the maid's leg at the very, very beginning and Arachne's death at the zoo. They did a lot of strategic cinematography tricks where, you know, right as soon as something was going to be really gory, they cut away to everybody's reaction. Or with Arachne's death, they still had her die the same way, it just was more contained, because if they had shown it on the movie, I think the ratings would have gone up very quickly. As well as it just not being generally well received by the audience, because it's one thing to read something being described in a book
It's a different thing to see it come to a screen and actually be faced with the reality of what you read. And I don't think they wanted to cross that line from telling you about something that's really horrifying and bad into turning it into a form of entertainment, because that would be literally what the Capitol citizens do. And I mean, I'm really glad they did, because I was maybe not the target demographic for the books, but I was in middle school when they were coming out, and a lot of the people I knew who were reading them and watching the movies were around my age. And if the films had been R-rated when they came out, it probably would have intimidated me out of enjoying the franchise anymore when I was that young.
I'm rereading Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes in anticipation of the movie coming out, and I was reminded of a theory that Mutual presented that I honestly just accept as canon. At the start of the book, the Snow family live in their ancestral home. There are 4 major things that you need to know about this apartment. There are 13 total floors, one of them being the base floor with the lobby, and the 12 above it. The Snow family live at the very top floor. They have a roof garden, and that it is along a wide avenue where major parades and military pomps or triumphs would be held. Anyone else put this together yet? It's Tribute Tower. He turned the building that he was raised in into the prison, or the zoo, if you will, for him to keep the tributes. He keeps District 12 in his ancestral home. The garden scene we all know and love took place on his grandmother's rooftop garden. This man is sick. So we actually already learned in Mockingjay what happened at 13. They were right above 12. And before the beginning of the Hunger Games, they were basically at a stalemate with the Capitol and came to an agreement that they would stay to themselves and the Capitol would lie to the rest of Panem, saying that they had basically blown District 13 off the map. What we learn in the prequel that doesn't even end up being mentioned in the movies is the fact that Snow's family's money was invested in District 13 industry. That's why his family is destitute, which had also added another level of complication between him and Sejanus, because the Plinth family received their wealth because District 2 ended up making these weapons instead of District 13 now, which all the more made him feel more entitled to Sejanus's opportunities and wealth. And what's interesting is that in the prequel, Coriolanus, as far as he knows, 13 was also blown off the map. He doesn't know that there was some sort of agreement that came between the Capitol and District 13. So who knows how long it was until he learned that even. Which just goes to show you how much the Capitol lies to their own citizens. So how did Panem even come to be, and what is the rest of the world doing? Unfortunately, we only know what the book tells us. In both the prequel and the trilogy, our narrators have very limited perspective, and they're not omnipotent, so they only know what they're told. What we're told is that there was all-out world war, and that the only human civilization left is in Panem. Now, that sounds like outright propaganda to me. Before we go into those theories, let's talk about how Panem was operating before the Dark Days. People used to live all throughout these districts and be able to pass through them freely. So you could live in 10 and be able to go up to 6. The idea is that each district had these industries that were invested in by those in the Capitol, specifically families within the Capitol. Now, because they were able to pass freely, there were telephones, they were able to contact each other, they were able to coordinate a rebellion in which they cut off the Capitol from everything. In the Capitol, they're not sustaining themselves in any way whatsoever. Many of them end up having to resort to cannibalism in order to feed themselves. Once the tide began to turn and Capitol was able to win the war, that's when the development of the cities that you see in the movie came into place, because they herded everyone that was in the districts, they herded them all within one gated city. As for what the rest of the world is doing, we can only theorize. I have a couple theories. My guess is that they're either in just as much of a totalitarian state as Panem, or they aren't, and they're just not equipped with the nuclear weapons in order to take Panem on. Someone once had a theory that I thought was pretty cool. I didn't do much diving into it, but the idea that District 4, part of why they became a career and why they're trusted along the coast is because they're also used for imports and exports with other countries, which I thought that was cool. Don't don't shoot the messenger. I just think it's a cool idea.
What happened to the rest of the world outside of Panem during the Hunger Games? My mutual Rosa just posted a video about this a couple of hours ago, so I'm gonna link it. But I don't really hear what the world outside of Panem is like being debated very much between Hunger Games fans, because we're not given like any information about it. A lot of people take the book at face value and assume that civilization outside of Panem was completely wiped out. But I have an extremely difficult time believing that. They told the citizens of Panem that District 13 was destroyed when it wasn't, because if they knew it existed, it would give them hope for escape from the regime of the capital. And we know in places like North Korea, no information can go in and no information can come out, and every single piece of information that the citizens there consume is dictated by the government. Even in the States, it can be really jarring coming out of the public school system and realizing how nationalistic the curriculum you were consuming was. There's a whole TV show about how somebody told a bunch of girls that the entire world had been destroyed and made them live in a bunker for several years. So I firmly believe there was civilizations outside of Panem. What those civilizations looked like, on the other hand, is a really interesting question, because even if the information the capital was feeding the citizens of Panem wasn't accurate, there obviously had been significant climate change and wars and famine and all of these things. What I would be interested to see is if outside of Panem had been the downfall of civilization and that there was no law and no order. Like, how eerie would it be if during the Hunger Games we got a glimpse of what life outside of Panem was actually like, and we saw people living the exact opposite of the way the capital wanted them to, and doing it peacefully. I think when we debate whether or not the Hunger Games reapings were rigged in any way, and people say that there's no way they were, people forget that President Snow cheated in the Hunger Games when he was in them. He cheated several times in the Hunger Games when he was in them. Like, he very much rigged the games to get the outcome he wanted, and he wasn't even in charge of making the games themselves. So as president, I feel very strongly that he would have done anything in his power to only put people in the arena that he wanted to have in the arena, and only having the person win that he wanted to have win. Which really drive home the rebellious nature of how Haymitch and Beatty won their games, because they won their games by outsmarting the capital and using its own technology against it. Because what if Snow's whole plan was to never let District 12 have a victor? But Haymitch won his games by outsmarting the capital, and so did Beatty. So years later, when District 12 finally has tributes that have some promise, and they win in a rebellious way by being mentored by someone who won the games in a rebellious way, and then they go back into the arena being mentored by that same person alongside somebody else who also won their games in a rebellious way, it all just kind of unravels. Like, you know, the very few times that Snow loses control, the whole system comes undone. It's a very, very fragile system if it can be undone by just a couple of berries or a couple strikes of lightning. So there's a 3-hour and 40-minute long version of A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes that exists, that was tested on audiences earlier, that they said they needed to cut, which is why it is now 2 hours and 40 minutes. All I know is that there is an additional hour to this movie that was not released. What was in that hour that they removed? Because my number one complaint about A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is that it needs at least an additional hour. That movie is not nearly long enough. What am I gonna have to do to get my mitts on this? Like, what do I have to do? Are they going to release it? I don't know. I feel like they can't say it exists if they don't have plans on releasing it. That is just cruel. Like, you couldn't have allowed for like 10 extra minutes to tie up what happened with Clemmy. You couldn't let Sejanus's ma have more than one cameo. You couldn't let us see what Tigris was really up to while Snow was gallivanting around District 12. You really aren't gonna let us see Coriolanus and Sejanus kiss. Let's talk about Coriolanus sending the drones into the arena in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie. Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes spoilers ahead. Most of the plot changes are omissions in the movie, but this is one of the biggest things I feel that they actually changed about the plot, because that's not how it goes in the book. In the book, the drones get sent into the tributes. The tributes from District 3 grab the drones and bring them down into the tunnels, and then they program them to use them as weapons against other tributes in the arena. And this is like a fairly big deal, because District 3 has a habit of doing this. This was Coriolanus' idea to send these drones into the arena, and the first time it happens, it's used against him. In the movie, he's the person who identifies all of the faults in the arena and uses them to his own advantage, but in the book, a lot of these things are pointed out by other people. A lot of the times, his ego blinds him from all of the ways he can be taken advantage of, and this is one of them. Also, the drones aren't like programmed to target or attack the tributes in any way or necessarily be like harmful unless they come in like a swarm. So that part just kind of confused me. Coriolanus sends all of the water into the arena by drone in the books in order to scare Jessup away from Lucy Gray because he's rabid and terrified of water. It's then that Lucy Gray brings the water down into the tunnels and uses the rat poison in the water to kill Wovey. Still simply passes from tuberculosis. I've said that they changed this in the movie, but I understand why, because I don't think I would have been okay. Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes spoilers ahead. The question is not, did Coriolanus and Sejanus actually kiss? The question is, when? Like, it doesn't say anything, but those two have definitely kissed. You cannot tell me otherwise. I think The Hunger Games is a really great special interest because no matter what your overall interests are, it's really fun to analyze. If you're really interested in history and the patterns of history over time, it's a really great book because it follows a lot of historical patterns and it's fun to compare them. If you're interested in politics or government and how governments work, this is a really great way to start learning about the different systems of government and what they look like. If you're interested in literature or Shakespeare or ancient Rome or anything, there are so many allusions to famous works of literature in the series that are really, really, really fun to look at. I initially got into The Hunger Games because I've always just really enjoyed survival-based media. I grew up watching shows like Survivor and Bear Grylls and things like that, but then I read Hatchet for the first time when I was in the 4th grade, and I loved it. Like, I read that book so many times, and the year I read it was the year the first Hunger Games book came out. And that was also around the first time I traveled internationally for the first time, and I went to South Korea a couple summers in a row. And that was really when I started learning about what North Korea was, and what those kinds of systems of government looked like, and what oppressive systems of government looked like. There's seriously just so much out there to learn. And The Hunger Games really encapsulated a lot of those things that really piqued my interest, and also pointed me in a lot of new directions about new questions I could ask, new things I could research, new parallels I could draw from everyday life into the series. Like, it's not only really fun to analyze and talk about, but it also really provides a lot of understanding about the real world, and I really like that about the series.
Love Renee Rapp. Don't get it twisted, my tickets for Mean Girls are booked and ready to go, okay? But I haven't forgotten the way that you got out your torches and pitchforks for Rachel Zegler. I'm not over it. Because all Rachel Zegler did was do a few interviews where she said, hey, I think actors deserve to get paid for the work they do. Hey, I'm a working actor. Sometimes I take roles that I think are shitty because this is my job and I have to. And hey, like, Disney has a history of racism and the source material for this needs to be updated so that way it can fit a modern audience. Y'all came for her fucking throat. There were millions of people signing petitions that she should get all of her roles stripped from her, that she should be canceled, that she should get removed from all future things, calling her rude, ungrateful, unmedia trained, a bitch. And then 3 months later, Renee Rapp is cursing like a fucking sailor in interviews, saying she hates old people, and saying that the original Mean Girls is out of date and needed to be updated. Doing the same shit that Rachel Zegler was doing, and in some ways worse, because I think Rachel Zegler wasn't saying anything offensive. That she's getting, Renee Rapp is getting op-ed pieces about how amazing and charismatic and unfiltered and fun she is. The same people and publications that were saying that Rachel Zegler's an ungrateful, rude bitch who needs more media training. And this is rhetorical, girl. I know the answer. Renee Rapp looks a little bit more like I do, skin color-wise. That's the answer. That's the reason. I'm not dragging Renee Rapp on this. I think Renee Rapp is awesome and would agree with what I'm saying. I'll need to apologize. Because the fact that one white woman in Hollywood is getting lauded with praise for how unfiltered, unrestrained she is, when literally just a few months ago, a woman of color had a sexist hate campaign launched against her. Just so not right. And you know what? I'll take it a step further. Get Renee Rapp and Rachel Zegler in a movie together. And that media tour is going to be so much fun. Y'all gotta apologize to her first. And that's the tea.
When I tell you that this film is for the sickos, know that I mean it as the highest compliment, because I do not remember the last time I have seen a film so salacious, so utterly depraved, so deliciously wicked, and so much fucking fun. Emerald Fennell's second film, Saltburn, is out today. I saw it a couple weeks ago at Beyond Fest, and I gotta be so honest with you right now, this is my favorite film of the year so far, and there have been some incredible films this year. Not only is every performance absolutely outstanding, Jacob Elordi, Barry Keoghan, Rosamund Pike is such a standout, but these characters are so vile in the most entertaining way possible. Now, I absolutely love Eat the Rich as a genre of film. I absolutely love films like The Menu, Triangle of Sadness, Ready or Not. But what stands out to me about this film is the setting, because it's set in the early 2000s, which as an era in time was unbelievably vapid and shallow, brand, money, status obsessed. And that absolutely bled into your everyday interactions. And it's interesting to me because I've already seen some criticism about this film saying it's beautiful and lush, and it very much is. Like, the aspect ratio is very unique, it's very stylized, it's absolutely stunning cinematography, score-wise, like set design, everything. But people are accusing it of being like empty at its core, which I could not disagree more with. I think the emptiness is the point, actually. And it's interesting to me because some of that criticism really reminds me of another film that takes place during this time period that I feel like was very wrongfully maligned when it came out, which is The Bling Ring. Because I think similarly, it has very similar critiques about culture during this time that was just not really understood when it came out. The surface charm of the beauty and the cleverness of the writing is all part of the facade. It's a commentary on the underlying emptiness therein. But more so than any of that, I was just completely swept away by this story from start to finish. It was totally engrossing. As a thriller, as a mystery, it left me questioning and wanting more every single second. Every scene left me more intrigued and interested than the last. I just loved every second of it. This film is just beautiful, unbridled, hedonistic debauchery, and it's honestly one of the most fun times I've had in a theater in I don't know how long. Also, the soundtrack is 2000s gold. Go see this movie. It is a fucking blast, and it will leave you shocked and appalled in the best way. I would absolutely love to talk about The Bling Ring because I think there is perhaps no greater example of how deeply entrenched in internalized misogyny the world of film criticism is than the reception of this film. I want to make it very clear. I'm not saying that if you didn't or don't like this film, you are a misogynist. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that a major through line in a lot of the critical reception of this film was based around the idea that Sofia Coppola couldn't possibly have been in on the joke. It was based around some very stereotypical ideas of what art by and for women should look like. If you remember, at the time, 2013, the majority of art that had been recognized and rewarded and critically acclaimed made by women was like The Piano, The Hurt Locker, Sofia Coppola's own Lost in Translation, this idea that women have to be sad in order to be respected. I genuinely think this film is massively impressive, like top tier in Sofia Coppola's filmography, and also very important in many different ways. Like, it's obviously beautifully shot and scored. Sofia Coppola consistently has a great eye for a good aesthetic. It's also very, very funny, and I find it interesting that a lot of people didn't seem to understand that it was supposed to be funny. A lot of people seem to miss that it was an intentional satire. But also, I think from a pop culture commentary and like film as history aspect, this film, there's very few modern American films that are as important in this one in accurately depicting the decline of American culture. Like, as someone who lived through this time, not only is it an insanely accurate depiction of how vapid and shallow and empty and desperate this cultural moment was, but this film helped me recontextualize it and see parallels to like the 1920s and the excess and nihilism of that time as well. I think it's always really brave to tell a story about an unlikable protagonist, but even more so when those protagonists are women, and unbelievably so when those protagonists are teenage girls, a demographic that has had so much collective vitriol aimed at them. It's truly unbelievable. And I think what was remarkable about The Bling Ring was how humanizing it was to these deeply, deeply unlikable characters in showcasing how fundamentally dehumanizing our culture was/is. Because one of the recurring complaints I've seen about this film from critics is that Sofia Coppola shot it with too much of a clinical, removed lens, that you couldn't get up close with these characters. They felt like they couldn't really get to know them. But as someone who was a teenage girl during this time, that is in itself the commentary and the point, because the culture was very much uninterested in who you were as a person or what you were feeling. It was what you could give to them. This was such a bleak moment in time, and it feels like such a cultural shift, this moment when fame culture was really invented, when it wasn't just, the idea of fame being someone plucked out of obscurity to be one of the chosen ones at the top, but because of the internet, because of social media, anyone really had their chance. You could theoretically have your moment, reality TV. And again, it kind of feels like the reinvention of like this notorious most wanted in the 1920s kind of wild, wild west idea of what fame means in a really destructive way. And I don't think it's gone away, to be clear. I think that it's shifted. What we demand of our public figures has shifted over the past decade. But ultimately, the cycle remains the same. Because of the internet, because of our increasingly shorter attention spans, we love to build someone up into the glorious spotlight and then brutally tear them down. And the hunger to be a part of that, even knowing how fucking horrible it is so pervasive. And I think this film captures that sensation, that yearning, in a way that is really real. And I think this film's fucking fantastic, so.
Talked a little bit about the new Mean Girls movie, but I would love to give my very honest overview. Quick disclaimer, I did enjoy this film. I am a big Mean Girls fan, both of the original 2004 film and of the musical. I saw it twice when it was on Broadway, and before anybody starts and tries to invalidate my opinion with, well, theater kids would know, and musical theater, as if that makes my opinion any more or less valid, I have no desire to bring up the fact that I went to theater school, but I literally did, so please don't start with that. You're annoying, and you know I enjoy critique. I love passionate opinions. I welcome them. And you know, if I don't like something, I'll tell you. But I did enjoy this film, and I think a lot of you are just simply being nasty and just overall doing entirely too much. I think this film was very clearly meant to both nod to the original film and the stage musical while doing something new. Did it achieve that? Yes, I think it did. And that's how adaptations of this kind should be. Aesthetically, I liked it for the most part. I liked the vibe. I liked the costumes. And as unmatched and beautiful as the original film is, it wasn't meant to be an exact replication of that, but I think there were enough nods to it that it was cute. I liked Regina's bedroom and everything, and for the most part, I think you're all doing too much in that area. Cast and character-wise, I'll start with the very unpopular. I've talked about Katie a little bit, but I don't agree with you all. I love this Katie. I love this characterization. I believe this Katie the most. I believe she grew up in Africa and she was homeschooled and she's unsocialized and properly awkward, and she would easily fall into this web. She's soft and sweet and introspective and properly awkward and clueless, sympathetically so, and realistically, that is what Katie would most likely be like. Stupid with Love is my favorite song from Mean Girls, and while I do love the original version, I love this version so much. I can't stop listening to it. It's my favorite. It sounds like what a secret crush feels like. It's daydreamy and soft and no less effective in my opinion. It sounds like cotton candy twirling your hair, secret crush. It's so cute and adorable, and it fits her so well. You all want to talk about teen girlhood and womanhood and crushes and all that. You can have big, overwhelming emotions and express them introspectively and internally and softly, and while a big, loud, goofy Katie works well and makes sense for a stage musical, realistically, with the story she's been given, this is most likely how Katie would be. Some of you have never been quietly filled with calculus, and it's like hush hush, and it shows, and you know, if Phoebe Bridgers sang this, you would eat it up. I obviously don't agree that she can't sing. She didn't belt as much as the others. She did a little bit by the end there, and again, I think that was intentional. Yes, she is more like soft cotton candy radio pop, or at least this singing is, and that seems to be a big gripe, that the others were more like classical musical theater. But again, might I add that Katie is supposed to be different than the others, and I think she was intentionally given a different musical style, and I think it was adorable. And interestingly, Aaron was a much smaller character, and his singing was cut out of the film entirely, so however you feel about that, but he was also like quiet and introspective in this version, also awkward, and I did think they were cute, and it also painted this clearer picture, I think, that Regina didn't really seem to like Aaron that much, but perhaps went for him in the first place because he seemed to be weak-willed maybe, and easily overpowered and intimidated by her, just like she does with all of her relationships. And it was very interesting, which brings me to another point. This Regina is great, and that seems to be a general consensus, and I agree. Renee Rapp, of course, is a star. Stunning and powerful, impressive vocals, funny. This version of Someone Gets Hurt, I loved it. I think it's so cool, and much like Katie, I think this version of Regina, character-wise, is more three-dimensional than she ever was before. Rachel McAdams was much more classic and proper and cutesy on the outside, and while totally iconic and vicious, much less intimidating than this Regina, dare I say. Hardly anything is subtle about this Regina, and yet this version digs much deeper into the heart of Regina's insecurity and why she surrounds herself with the people she does and the layers of it and why she acts the way she does. And of course, she's very captivating to watch the whole time, and I will say it again, I think this Katie works perfectly against this Regina because you can totally understand why this Regina goes for this Katie and why this Katie just doesn't understand how Regina operates or her motives at first. And another thing I really appreciated about this Katie is that you could really see that she was really just mimicking behaviors in the beginning without knowing that they were bad or what they meant, and then of course she gets caught up. But in the beginning there, she really was like believably clueless, and I think that's such an effective way to show show these teen girl dynamics and girl world and the web of it all, because Katie really was a blank slate. And I think you're all doing too much on my girl. I saw the vision and I liked it. That's my truth. Like, for example, my favorite Mean Girls character has always been Janice. I love Janice. I'm attached to Janice. I could go on about Janice, and just side note, I completely, passionately disagree with the Janice is the meanest takes and that she's like worse than Regina. I could go on. I think Janice has become misunderstood in recent years, but that's a different story for a different time. But in my mind, Janice is different than this interpretation of Janice. She's more like sharp and subtle, like chill, but under the surface vitriolic. But that doesn't mean I'm gonna go and say that this was a bad performance and an insult to the institution of theater or movies or Janice or anything like that, because it wasn't. This Janice and Damien were more like animated. They were very classic musical theater. They kind of gave Disney, and I don't think that's a bad thing. This Janice was more perky, which is different than how I see Janice, but I get it. I understand the vision. They were very cute, very funny, and beautiful, powerful vocals from both of them. Karen, no notes. What a star. I have never met a Karen that I didn't like. I love Karen so much, but like this was wonderful and different and iconic. Gretchen too. The two of them, honestly, no notes. So cute, great voices, just lovely. I love them. So overall, I would say I love the way the story is told in this one. I'm a Mean Girls fan and I love all three versions. I know a lot of people were upset about songs being cut, and that is so valid. I know a lot of people were upset about songs being changed. I personally really liked it for the most part, but that is also valid. When you have adaptations with source material that is beloved, that is going to happen, and that's okay. You are entitled to those opinions. You don't have to like every choice. You don't have to like anything, and you are allowed to express those opinions passionately. But some of you are doing too much, and I think you know that. Some of you need to chill about certain things. Reflect and relax. But yeah, that's my truth. I liked it, and that's my truth.
The way people are talking about the Barbie movie in relation to awards season, like about whether or not it's going to deserve the awards that it ends up being nominated for, is absolutely infuriating. Like, it's frustrating enough how much people are willing to belittle and discredit the like laundry list of incredible technical achievements that are seen in this film. And Greta Gerwig has proven herself to be such a masterful, scholarly, and really like driven filmmaker with a clear artistic vision. And Barbie is another perfect example of this. Not to mention like the cultural impact that it has, which yes, is part of the conversation for Best Picture nominations. But the thing that frustrates me the absolute most is people acting like this film, and specifically its messaging, are far too mainstream and popular to ever possibly be considered like real art, and that the real like female filmmakers, the real artists, should be given opportunities, and this is just a waste of our time. Because it's absolutely absurd to me that people could actually have deluded themselves that unapologetic femininity has ever been cool. I know that we have this like really tiny bubble right now where we're seeing like all of these like hyper feminine idealization trends, like the coquette thing that's going on right now, and like the bimbo feminism of recent months and years. But it feels like the early 2000s when we had this like girl power feminism. It feels like a bubble that is really like on the precipice of bursting. And there absolutely shouldn't be like one specific kind of movie that women are allowed to make, or one specific kind of movie that's supposed to speak for all women's experiences, because women live all kinds of different varied lives, and there are many different like intersectional lenses that we need to look through. But any movie unapologetically celebrating femininity is in itself rebellious. And I'm sorry if you think that's crazy. It absolutely fucking is. It really wasn't that long ago that we had emails leaked from studio heads about how they were literally never going to produce another film with a woman in the lead because one movie bombed, and that means that audiences, don't want to see women. We've had a grand total of 3 women win an Oscar for Best Directing, and only one of them for a movie with a female lead. Like, Catherine Bigelow, the first woman to win an award for Best Director, one of only 2 women whose movies has won the Best Picture Oscar, like, made a career out of catering to, like, male-centric stories. It's just so strange to me that people want to act like, oh, this like girl thing is just a cash grab. Like, girls are always going to support that. Since when? The vast majority of like Sofia Coppola films, for example, were not popular when they came out. There was like all this talk about how Marie Antoinette was booed at Cannes when it came out. Like, it still is certified rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. If It's worth noting, too, that, like, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl and the cool girl trope and rom-coms suddenly being catered to men with the rise of Judd Apatow movies was, like, a direct response to the girl power, like, moment of the early 2000s with movies like Legally Blonde and, like, you know, the popularity of chick flicks. Like, that was a direct societal response to being fed up with femininity. I obviously don't think there's only one way to, like, be feminine. There's so many different ways to be feminine, but I do always think that one of the bravest things an artist can do is exhibit what they believe to be authentic femininity. And on a side note, one of the coolest things about Barbie is Greta Gerwig's embrace of authentic artificiality and the way that Barbie as a toy and as a representative of womanhood and feminism is inherently flawed because she obviously can't represent everything to all people and she's just a doll. I think the overall message of the movie is that trying to get feminism from a toy is always going to be insufficient. And I could talk a lot about that. But the point is, the movie is fantastic on many different levels. It's obviously award-worthy. And the fact that it appeals to girly things and is candy-coated doesn't make it less valuable. I actually think it's, like, exponentially more valuable because it refuses to not be those things, and it's still great. This news really sucks for a lot of reasons. Sofia Coppola had a profile come out today in The New Yorker where she revealed that she was working on her biggest and most ambitious project to date, a limited series adaptation of Edith Wharton's The Custom of the Country, and she had cast Florence Pugh as the lead. Apple TV was producing this, and she described it as like a 5-episode series of Marie Antoinette. It's about a Midwestern new money girl who's trying to infiltrate the Gilded Age upper class of Manhattan, and the character of Undine is a super complex character. But despite working on this project for 2 years, Apple at some point just pulled the funding. And apparently this came after multiple conversations about the lead character being so unlikable. Now, here's the thing. Sofia Coppola is widely regarded as one of the most successful female filmmakers working today. She's one of only a literal handful of women who have ever been nominated for Best Director at the Oscars or had their film nominated for Best Picture, Lost in Translation on both counts. And even though she's more of an indie darling, she's pretty much a household name at this point. And even she has talked a lot about how hard it is for her to secure funding for her films. I don't know what the budgetary conversations for this series were. I know that her most expensive film was Marie Antoinette and it cost $40 million to make. So I sincerely doubt that she was asking for like an unrealistic budget for this series, but what I keep coming back to is the sticking point of the unlikable female character, because no matter how much I look into this industry, I just keep coming back to this issue being that the way women operate in the film industry and the way women are portrayed on screen is always about likability. And as Sofia Coppola pointed out in this article, you know, Tony Soprano gets to be unlikable. There are a myriad of male characters who get to be unlikable. In fact, it's one of the most popular and most interesting male character tropes. You know, not just Tony Soprano, Walter White, Larry David, Jordan Belfort. No matter how you feel about The Wolf of Wall Street, I think it's effective satire, but I also think that satire, by nature of being satire, is always going to be misunderstood by some people. And I think that Jordan Belfort is one of the most clearly abhorrent, morally abhorrent, and disgusting characters ever put to screen. And it's like a juicy role that men want to act and audiences want to see. But you put a woman in a role like that and automatically people say nobody wants to see that. And of course there are exceptions. Every rule has exceptions. But across the board, what I typically see is when female characters are allowed to be unlikable, they are placed in stories that bend over backwards to make them sympathetic, give them a tragic backstory, or explain that they're actually just doing these terrible things for their family, or they're misunderstood, or it's mental illness. And it just so strongly reiterates the idea that women's first priority in life, in all things in life, is to be a palatable product for consumption. And men get to be complex, interesting characters that you can see the world through their eyes. Women are there for the temporary enjoyment and consumption of the masses. And the rub is it's all for nothing, because you can be as sweet and syrupy as Anne Hathaway or as brash and real and Jennifer Lawrence. It doesn't matter, because eventually it all gets old. Audiences just get tired of women. I mean, Margot Robbie's recent comments are a perfect example, where she said she thinks she might need to take a break because people are tired of seeing her face. And I think a lot of people's immediate reaction was, no, we're not tired of you. But the thing that's missing from the end of that sentence is yet. Like, she's probably right, because you can look at the careers of the most successful women in Hollywood, and it does seem like they have navigated the spotlight very strategically so that, you know, they don't overstay their welcome. And when it comes to characters, the example is so much more extreme, because actors only show us a small curated portion of what they want us to see. They're still, at the end of the day, selling something. But these characters are supposed to elicit real human emotions and portray real human feelings and experiences. And when you're limiting that to something that is palatable, you're dehumanizing women, like collectively. I know that, like, in the year of the Barbie movie, we all want to believe that women's representation in Hollywood has made huge strides, and we've definitely made progress. I mean, I don't want to say we haven't made progress. We have, particularly white women, as women of color are still vastly more underrepresented. But it's important to remember that Barbie is a massive outlier. And as much as I love the Barbie movie, it's not exactly challenging the idea of what women are allowed to do on screen. You know what I mean? Anyway, if somebody has like $40 million and wants to fund Sofia Coppola's project, I would love to see it. So get in touch with her.
10 Things I Hate About You is probably the only 90s rom-com that will never ever age because of how self-aware it is, especially within its feminism. Now, Kat, who is played by Julia Stiles, is supposed to be this feminist icon. That's the way she's positioned. And I love this scene where they're discussing what she likes, and they say Thai food, feminist prose, and angry girl music of the indie rock persuasion. That's who she is. She's not like other girls. She's different from the get-go. And we see her reading Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar. We see that she is a feminist. Even when she's in her literature class, she's always putting her hand up, talking about patriarchy and how the texts that they're reading are very male-dominated. All very great points. But what makes the feminism of this film never go out of date is because it becomes aware of itself. It's aware that Kat's feminism is very limited. And we see this through her teacher, who, it's really funny, kind of calls her out for walking around acting as if she's the most oppressed person in the world. And she is an upper middle class suburban girl who is living, off her father's money and doesn't really take a second to consider other forms of oppression. And there's another scene with her English teacher when he points out to her, when you're going and you're complaining about the curriculum and saying there aren't enough women on the curriculum, you should also ask them why there aren't any black men on the curriculum. And we get this idea of class and race being introduced to Kat, who up until this point doesn't really know anything about it. So the film positions Kat as a feminist icon, and I think she is, right? And in her understanding of feminism, she is only starting to learn the intersections that can exist. She's starting to learn that actually class, race, and all of these other things can impact the way in which your feminism looks. The intersectional feminism is essentially being introduced to her. And I love, love, love that this film does that. And this is in the 90s. So if you compare the feminism of Barbie to that of 10 Things I Hate About You, which came out in 1999, you see that 10 Things I Hate About You is ahead of its time or off its time. It's starting to introduce ideas of third wave feminism. It's starting to introduce ideas of intersectionality, whereas Barbie is going back to square one. And we've talked about this in length. We're not going to go into it again. But yes, this is, in my opinion, one of the best feminist films to ever come out of mainstream film, mainstream media, and a must watch. And it's really good. It's actually just really good.
The Oscar nominations have just been announced. I was there and I have a lot of thoughts. Let's break it down. Can you guess which category they were reading when this screenshot was taken? Let's get into it. First category they announced was actor in a supporting role, and there's a lot in here that was expected. Sterling K. Brown for American Fiction, Robert De Niro, Killers of the Flower Moon, Robert Downey Jr., Oppenheimer, Ryan Gosling, Barbie, Mark Ruffalo, Poor Things. The big snub, obviously, is Charles Melton. I'm still massively shocked that he didn't get in. It feels so egregious. I feel like Robert De Niro, he's a great actor, but this nomination really surprises me. He feels like the outlier. I'm thrilled for Mark Ruffalo. Obviously, I was rooting for Milo from Anatomy of a Fall, but Anatomy of a Fall got a ton of love. Supporting actress is also like fairly as predicted. Emily Blunt, obviously, and for Oppenheimer. Danielle Brooks, great to see her for The Color Purple. Da'Vine Joy Randolph for The Holdovers. She is the front runner. I think she's going to take it. We have our first Nyad appearance, ladies and gentlemen. Jodie Foster, again, in for Nyad, a movie that exists for sure. And America Ferrera for Barbie, which is an interesting choice considering because Margot Robbie did not get a nomination for Best Actress, which is shocking to me on many levels. First of all, like the film Barbie doesn't work if Margot Robbie isn't able to sell that role with 100% authenticity and believability. And I think what she did with that role is massively impressive. The most impressive acting performance in the film, I think, but also Barbie got 8 nominations total. And to not nominate the lead actress that brings it home just feels weird. Feels weird to me. I am more upset about the fact that Greta Lee did not get nominated for Past Lives, but they both feel egregious to me. I would also love to see Teyana Taylor for 1001. Yeah, this category is shocking. We got Annette Bening for Naiad again. Lily Gladstone, fuck yeah, Lily Gladstone. Sandra Hüller, I love Sandra Hüller. Carey Mulligan for Maestro, and as expected, Emma Stone for Poor Things. I am also devastated to report that Andrew Scott did not get nominated for All of Us Strangers. In fact, All of Us Are Strangers got 0 nominations. Actor in a leading role went to Bradley Cooper, Maestro, Coleman Domingo, Rustin, Paul Giamatti, The Holdover, Cillian Murphy, Oppenheimer, and Jeffrey Wright, American Fiction. Now, again, a lot of these were pretty expected. A lot of them are super deserved. I will never not be mad that Teo Yu and Andrew Scott did not get nominated. I think that they were two of the most quietly powerful performances of the year, and I'm disappointed. So listen, the best director category, it's frustrating, okay? There's a lot that I love to see here. Love to see Poor Things. Obviously, Avi was expected. Love to see Scorsese for Killers of the Flower Moon. Justine Triet for Anatomy of Fall. The outpouring of love for Anatomy of Fall makes me so happy, as it's one of my personal favorites of the year, and Justine Triet deserves all of the acclaim. How you have a year where 3 of the Best Picture nominees were directed by women this year, which was so great for women in film. How you have Barbie, which was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, and you only have 1 woman in this category. How Greta Gerwig has yet again, she's 2 for 2 now with films that are getting multiple nominations, including Best Picture and Best Screenplay, and she's missing the Best Director nomination. That sucks. It's not a pattern that I love to see continuing in 2024. So these are the Best Picture nominees: American Fiction, Anatomy of a Fall, Barbie, The Holdovers, Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, Oppenheimer, Past Lives, Poor Things, and The Zone of Interest. There's a lot that was really expected. There's a lot that I'm happy about here. I'm thrilled to see Past Lives here, even though Past Lives was not recognized anywhere else. But yeah, it's a lot of ups and downs. It's a lot of ups and downs. And if you want a more detailed breakdown of my thoughts on award season so far, my most recent episode of my podcast, The Broad Perspective, has like a full breakdown on all the films and all the awards so far. The new episode coming out tomorrow is also going to be all about this, so check it out.
If Martin Luther King was alive today, y'all would hate him, and more than likely, he would not rock with most of y'all. And I know this for 2 reasons. 1, y'all mess up his legacy all the time. Y'all begin and end with his whole anti-racist, I have a dream that someday the little Negro and the precious white angel baby are going to hold hands and skip down the lane. And that's who Martin Luther King is in your heads. He just holds hands and wants peace and love. And that's not true. Martin Luther King was an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, radical Christian who thought that the greatest threat to Black progress was the white moderate, which, for better or worse, is many of you. In that same vein, y'all have no real concept of civil disobedience, especially the kind of civil disobedience he was getting into. Y'all see it as, yes, we're going to follow the rules exactly as they're given to us. We're going to sign up, make sure that we have all the right paperwork. We're going to protest exactly on the sidewalk where the police told us to, and just hope that they give us our civil rights. That's not what he was about. He would absolutely, in the year 2023 and 2024, would be outside advocating for the liberation of Palestine, blocking the highways to your precious airports. He would not have liked y'all, and y'all would not have liked him. But number 2, he very much could still be alive because this wasn't that long ago, which means y'all haven't really changed all that much. Realistically, Martin Luther King would be like 95 years old at this point. His daughter has a Twitter account. He could have had a Twitter account. He's younger than Betty White. His pictures are in color. Y'all are not that far removed from the transgressions or the mindset of your grandparents or even your parents. And I know that because Donald Trump just won the Iowa caucus. Like, just now. Many of y'all would not have liked Martin Luther King. And we know this because his life was not only cut short, but he died an enemy of the state, meaning that many, many, many people did not like him. And he was getting increasingly radical with age. He wasn't mellowing out. Y'all can do this thing that you do every year. Judge us by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. But I promise you, he rolls in his grave every single time y'all say that. While y'all are reflecting on this, keep his wife's name out your mouth. I see the people who say that Black liberation leaders and Black activists were or would now be Zionists, the same way that I see people who say, like, the Democratic Party is the party of the KKK. Like, they're just people who refuse to see how history works and how people and their ideas and their beliefs change as, time passes. Like, I can't debate you. You're absolutely right. Many Black leaders at that time were Zionist, but that really came out of, like, post-war anti-Semitism, the horrors that we saw, the things that people learned. And as we learned the atrocities that were coming at the expense of creating Israel, they changed their minds because they learned. And they grew. So they can say it like they're not going to be wrong about it, But when you track the way that like ideology has changed and how Black leaders have consistently been on the side of pro-Palestine once people learned about the conflict in any deeper level, they can talk about it, and I'm not going to sweat it because I can like critically think above like a fourth grade level. So McDonald's is bringing back the breakfast wrap. They're working towards bringing back the snack wrap. They have teamed up with your favorite K-pop idols, and they are talking about improving the overarching quality of their food as a whole, all in the last 4 months, give or take. This means that in the last 3 to 4 months, we've seen more of an improvement in McDonald's food than we have seen in years. And this is happening at the same time we are all boycotting, or supposed to be boycotting, for Palestine. Let this be your sign that boycotts, when done intentionally, correctly, and with no end date set, are incredibly effective. And remember, no matter what they do, no matter what they change, we don't eat there no more. And that means a lot coming from me personally, because one reason I picked my apartment years ago was because of its proximity to a McDonald's. I don't go there no more. It's done. So keep it up, because boycotts work. And on that note, stop going to Starbucks too. No. Finish the quote. If you're going to use Martin Luther King's words, finish the quote. Zionists love to reference this quote, "Peace for Israel means security," that Martin Luther King said when they're talking about the fact that he was a Zionist, a fact that literally no one denies. It's right there. But like almost the rest of the quotes that people love to use for Martin Luther King, it is completely decontextualized from the rest of the speech. If you finish the quote, which again, y'all almost never do, you'd know that he then goes on to say, on the other hand, we must see what peace for the Arabs means in a real sense of security on another level. Peace for Arabs means the kind of economic security that they so desperately need. That's what he's saying. He's not just pro-Israel by any means necessary. He's advocating for peace in the land. Keep in mind, this speech was made in 1968, just 20 years after Israel was created, and a little bit more than 20 years after we learned about the actual Holocaust. Martin Luther King, like many other civil rights leaders, especially many religious civil rights leaders, believed in Zionism because Jewish people were and are still an oppressed group, and their whole thing is the liberation and support of oppressed peoples. But as we learn the consequences of trying to bust open a new nation inside of a pre-existing one, many civil rights leaders began to reevaluate what they were saying and feeling. Of course, Jewish people need a safe place where they can exist, obviously, but it can't come at the expense of someone else, and that is where ideology was beginning to shift. But in this year, 2024, after 102 days of genocide against the Palestinian people, where they have experienced endless death and destruction, thousands of people, thousands of children have lost their lives, even more have been injured, even more have been displaced, as they are suffering from starvation, isolation, white phosphorus, countless bombings, just being straight up murked in the streets. You're not going to tell me that Martin Luther King is going to be like, oh yeah, dude, that's totally cool. That stands in bold-faced opposition of everything he's ever stood for. So stop taking that speech out of the context it exists in, because he's not just so pro-Israel until the cows come home that he lacks critical thinking. In fact, if he had not been assassinated just 10 days after giving this speech, if he had gotten to live out till the end of his natural life, it is likely that he, like many other civil rights leaders who did live much longer lives, would shift their tunes at least a little bit. And to end, I'll leave you with a quote from his actual daughter when she corrected Amy Schumer for doing the same thing that many of you were doing. She says, "Certainly my father was against anti-Semitism, as am I. He also believed that militarism, along with racism and poverty, to be among the interconnected triple evils. I am certain he would call for Israel's bombing of Palestine to cease, for hostages to be released, and for us to work towards true peace, which includes justice." Y'all will never convince me that Jesus would have been an apolitical, neutral person. And if you think that, then that just means that you see politics as inherently separate from the human condition, which is not the case. In fact, Jesus offered most of his support and care to those in need, who are the people who are most impacted by politics. There is absolutely no way that he would sit by and let bad things continue to happen via politics the way they're happening now. In fact, Jesus stood 10 toes down by the poor, so much so that when he walked into a temple and saw people in need getting played out of their land by loan sharks and thieves, he quite literally flipped their tables over, kicked them out, and then proceeded to heal the sick.
He's not letting the American healthcare system float. He's not letting almost anyone's healthcare system float, in all honesty. I mean, while Jesus believes in goodwill and peace, obviously, he isn't too thrilled with the people who stand in the way of that goal, which means that, like, politicians would have to go, landlords would have to go, most businesses would have to go, billionaires would have to go. He dismantled just about every single system that we have because it is negatively impacting so many people. So I guess Jesus would be non-political in that he probably wouldn't be, campaigning around, vote for Biden, vote blue no matter who. Like, that probably wouldn't be his speed. But to assume he would be outside of politics, as in not involved, is audacious.